This is the history of the Nigerian Biafran Genocide. Prior to the genocide, Nigeria had just gained independence from British rule. Before Nigeria gained their independence, all the tribes, including the Igbo, Hausa, and Yoruba, were united in a discontent with British control. Once Britain left, the tribes were no longer focused on gaining their independence, which had previously brought people together with a common goal. Instead, they started focusing their hatred on one another. This also brought new political uncertainty, as Nigeria had to come up with their own new government system. They eventually came up with a system where each tribe had part in the government, but this led to further conflict because certain tribes, specifically the Hausa, felt that the Igbos were trying to take over. Another event that led up to the genocide was suppression and violence towards the Igbo people. The Igbos began to face severe suppression by the Nigerian military, which included a massacre of tens of thousands of Igbos known as the 1966 Anti-Igbo Program. This was due to both religious and political differences, as the Igbos were Christian and the Hausa were Muslim. This caused a large disconnect between the two culturally. The Hausa were also afraid that the Igbos were gaining too much political and social power, as the Igbos were dominating in business, trade, and leading to the massacres of the Igbos, as well as the Igbos being forced to consolidate into eastern Nigeria. The anti-Igbo program and other hate-related violence and suppression towards the Igbos eventually led to the Igbos deciding to separate from Nigeria, forming the Republic of Biafra in 1967. The Nigerian government first attempted to get the Igbos back through diplomatic efforts. However, this quickly failed, and so the Nigerian government put a blockade around the newly formed state of Biafra, and the genocide began. The Hausa people justified their genocide against the Igbos in several different ways. In 1966, the Igbos people began to stage a coup against the government because of the oppression and violence they were being treated with during the anti-Igbo program. The Hausa then used this one instance of violence to justify the genocide. This is obviously not a very good justification, considering the Igbos were using one instance of violence to get their way after tons of violence was being used against them. The Hausa claimed that since the Igbos chose not to return to Nigeria after they formed the Republic of Biafra, even though they attempted diplomatic efforts peacefully, they say that the violence was their last resort and they had no other options. The newly self-governed Nigeria faced many political problems, especially because the government was divided by the different ethnic groups, with the different religions of the Hausa being Muslim and the Igbos being Christian. The Hausa also justified their actions by claiming that the Igbos were attempting to dominate Nigeria politically and also through trade, because they were essentially dominating in the business world, but they were simply just doing their jobs and had no real intention of taking over.
The first method of the Nigerian Biafran genocide was through the 1966 Anti-Igbo Program. This was a three-phase massacre by northern Nigerians against Igbos. This was a rebellion to the coup on the Nigerian government that was led by Igbo military officers, who felt like they weren't being represented in the government. They killed many northern Nigerians. These types of deaths and assassinations angered the northern Nigerians. They began to rebel against Igbos for their people being the ones who were responsible for the deaths. They did this through killing them and rioting against them. This event and the deaths that came from it contributed to a large amount of the deaths of the genocide. One of the northern Nigerian officials who died, and was the reason that northern Nigerians were angry, was Ahmadu Bello, who was killed and assassinated in the coup. The second main method of the Nigerian Biafran genocide was the blockade that the Nigerian government put on Biafra. 2 years after the Nigerian government declared war on the succeeded Republic of Biafra, they used its superior military power to capture the oil facilities and Port Harcourt. The oil facilities were one of the important supplies that helped the Biafran economy. Port Harcourt was created for access to palm oil resources, which was something that Biafra depended on also for the economy. The Nigerian government blocked military shipment to the Biafran army. They also stopped food and medicine supplies through this blockade. This caused a man-made famine. This famine also weakened people and made them more susceptible to disease. Some prominent diseases were kwashiorkor, marasmus, and anemia. This led to many deaths and was the main and most prominent part of the genocide. In the Nigerian Biafran genocide, there were four main leaders who helped the events progress. The first was Major Chukwuma Kaduna Nzogwu. He was a Christian Igbo and one of the main military officers who led the military coup that started this whole war. He was a Christian Igbo who felt like his people were not being properly represented in the government and therefore led a coup to overthrow said government on January 15, 1966. The next military leader who was important was General Johnson Aguiyi Ironsi. He was the Igbo military officer who assumed power after Nzogwu. He was the head of the national military government, and he also started a unitary system of governance, which is where the central government had full power. And he also did not prosecute the leaders of the first coup, who were Igbos. Because the government was now controlled by Igbos, many Northerners believed that Igbos were trying to take over the whole country through his actions. This caused the northern officers, northern Nigerians, to launch their own coup against the Igbo government in July 1966. The third main leader of the Nigerian Biafran genocide was Colonel Yakubu Gowon. He was the leader of the new Nigerian government after the second coup by northern Nigerians. Northern Nigerians and Nigerians in general believed that he had the power to reunite Nigeria because he was a Christian and because he was from the Middle Belt, which was the zone between northern and southern Nigeria. This gave him less bias because of his unproblematic religion, and his religion gave him a connection to the Igbos. However, after the second coup, there started to be many attacks against Igbos, and Gowon was not able to stop them. This caused Biafra, the eastern region of Nigeria, to secede from Nigeria and create the Republic of Biafra. The fourth leader was Colonel Chukwuemeka Ojukwu. He was the military governor of eastern Nigeria during Iran's rule. He was important because he was the first leader of the new Republic of Biafra. Because eastern Nigeria was the area that the Republic of Biafra came from, he became the head of state of the Republic of Biafra. He took necessary steps to make Biafra a sovereign nation, which made him so important, such as minting of currency and creating diplomatic relationships.
On January 15, 1970, Biafra officially surrendered to the federal military government of Nigeria, marking the end of a brutal and devastating civil war. The short-term effects of this conflict were catastrophic. The war led to the deaths of an estimated 500,000 to 3 million people, most of them Igbos, due to the combination of violence, famine, and disease. Much of this suffering was caused by the Nigerian government's military blockade of Biafra, which cut off essential food and medical supplies. Starvation was weaponized, and children were among the most vulnerable victims. As the violence escalated and conditions deteriorated, millions of civilians were forced to flee their homes. This created an enormous refugee crisis, with people packed into overcrowded camps where illness spread rapidly. Families were separated and many never reunited. In southeastern Nigeria, especially in the oil-rich Biafran region, the war left infrastructure in ruins. Roads, schools, hospitals, and farmlands were destroyed, crippling the region's economy and basic services. Cities that once thrived were reduced to rubble, and rebuilding efforts were slow and under-resourced. At the same time, ethnic tensions across Nigeria deepened. The war drove a wedge between the Igbos and other ethnic groups, reinforcing fear, mistrust, and resentment. Even though the war officially ended, the emotional and psychological wounds remained fresh. Many Igbos felt marginalized and betrayed, with little support or reconciliation offered by the federal government. The Biafran War left behind more than physical destruction. It caused deep and lasting scars on Nigeria's political, social, and cultural landscape. Even though General Gowon declared a message of no victor, no vanquished, the reality was very different. Igbos continued to face widespread discrimination after the war. They were often excluded from political and economic opportunities, which fueled anger and frustration. Over time, this led to the rise of separatist movements like IPOB, the indigenous people of Biafra, who continue to push for an independent Biafran state today. The genocide committed during the war remains largely unacknowledged. There have been no formal recognitions, no justice, and no reparations for the millions who suffered. Survivors carry deep trauma, and families continue to mourn loved ones without closure. This unresolved grief has become a key part of Igbo identity and collective memory. Internationally, the Biafran War exposed both the power and the limits of humanitarian aid. Though it inspired one of the world's first major global relief efforts, it also showed how little political will existed to stop the violence or hold anyone accountable. The crisis pushed humanitarian organizations to rethink their strategies, but it also highlighted the gap between aid and justice. In total, after gaining independence, Nigeria quickly became divided along ethnic and political lines. Tensions between the Igbo, Hausa Fulani, and Yoruba groups were intensified by a series of military coups and regional power struggles. In 1967, following violent massacres of Igbos in the north, the eastern region declared independence as the Republic of Biafra. The Nigerian government, under General Yakubu Gowon, responded with a full-scale war to suppress the secession. The war turned deadly and brutal. Military attacks, pogroms, and a blockade of the Biafran region led to widespread famine. Around 3 million people, mostly civilians, died, many from starvation. Internationally, most governments remained neutral, but the humanitarian crisis triggered global outrage. This led to the Biafran airlift, one of the first major international relief efforts of its kind. The effects of the conflict are still visible today. Ethnic divisions deepened, millions were displaced, and Nigeria has struggled with political and social instability ever since. Many Igbos continue to seek justice, and movements like IPOB still advocate for Biafran independence. The Igbo people overthrowing the Nigerian government was the main justification for the genocide that would follow suit. Please, can I have some food and water? I'm starving.
No, I won't.
The Nigerian government put a blockade around Biafra so that the Igbo people had no access to resources such as food and water and caused mass starvation. They did this because the Biafran people had gained independence without Nigeria's permission, so they were trying to limit their power.
This is all I have left.
One of the main consequences of the Biafran genocide was the destruction of the Nigerian economy.